episode of Higher Education, the podcast that explores career development in public education. I'm your host, Sarah Sergo, and in each episode, we will be exploring different aspects of career development, interviewing experts, and sharing practical advice. So today, we are going to be talking about interviewing. And so it's time to start leveling up our skills. Whether you're an experienced professional aiming to advance in your field, or maybe you're just a recent graduate who's found our podcast and is looking to enter into the workforce, honing your interview experience is essential for career growth. So to guide us through this subject, I've invited two guests to join me today. First, we have Nicole St. Louis, who is a personnel officer on our support talent acquisition team here at Frederick County Public Schools. Nicole started her career with Montgomery County Public Schools and made the jump to FCPS more than 10 years ago. And we also have Michelle Basie, one of our elementary school principals with Frederick County Public Schools. Michelle has served as the principal of Thurmont Primary since 2019 and started her career in FCPS as an early childhood teacher. She's later served in the roles of teacher specialist coordinator and assistant principal. So both of these ladies have sat in on and been part of a lot of interviews, and we're so glad that they're here with us today. Before we dive into this topic, I'd like to have each of them share their fast facts. Nicole, can you start by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your experience with interviewing as an HR professional?
Sure. So I'm Nicole St. Louis. I'm a personnel officer, as you mentioned, with Frederick County Human Resources Department. I have over 17 years now in public education, all of but 1 year in the human resources field. Both of my degrees are in human resources, and I've spent many hours interviewing individuals, prepping individuals for interviews, and providing essential feedback for candidates, as well as training resources for our hiring staff.
Thank you for sharing that. So we are really going to benefit from what perspectives you can share today. Now we're really lucky to pop on over to Michelle Basie. Michelle, can you unlock your fast facts and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Of course. My name is Michelle Basie, and I'm currently the principal at Thurmont Primary School. I've been with Frederick County Public Schools for 25 years. I served 12 years as a teacher, and then the rest of those years, I've been in different roles within central office and school-based administration and leadership. And I'm excited that we're going to have an opportunity today to talk about the importance of preparing for the interview process and getting yourself able to be hired into the position you're seeking.
Thank you so much. And I know both of you are important levers in the hiring work. And so I look forward to having you share your expertise today. One of the things that research has shown is that interviews are actually not the best predictor of job performance, but they're a necessary part of getting hired. So we all have to be able to do well at them. And in order to bring your best self to the interview experience, as you shared, Michelle, you have to start with good preparation. Organizations, schools, departments, offices, they like to see candidates who've taken the time to get to know who they are, what they value, what they're working toward, and then how those talents and skills that you bring are a match to that particular situation. So an interview, we know, is not just about showcasing your skills or saying all the things you've done. It's also really about demonstrating your commitment. That sort of mutual selection idea of you want to be working for that person in that space and why you're a good fit for what they're looking for. Last month's podcast we did on resumes talked about the importance of looking at the job description, which is step one to tailoring your interview. So the first questions for our guests, and I'm going to start with you, Michelle, is how important is research and preparation in conducting a successful interview? Like, what strategies would you say you use to ensure you're well prepared for an interview when you're a candidate?
I think of the preparation process as we're getting to know a candidate on paper before we've had the opportunity to meet them in person. So being thoughtful about your preparation is really critical. Thinking about not just that accurate and updated resume, but a letter of interest that is specific to the position and specific to the purpose and the why behind your interest in the position. thinking about ways that you might prepare yourself, such as visiting a school's website to learn more about that school, more about that student population, more about FCPS in general. If you know about our strategic goals, the things that we're committed to, those are going to be the things that you can showcase in the electronic document format before you've even stepped foot into the interview room.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing that perspective. Nicole, I'd love to get your thoughts on this. What are some ways that you can tell that an applicant is well prepared? What are some details that give you that information?
Yeah, great candidates that come in for interviews often have notes prepared with them that really shows that they've had the taken the time and the effort to really learn about the position that they're interviewing for, but not only, as Michelle said, about the school. Some of our positions here at FCPS are beyond school. There's some central office based or different departments that specialize in things, and taking the time to really research not only on our website, but even getting some feedback from individuals that you may know, and networking with other individuals to get more information about better preparing for the actual position that you're going to be interviewing for.
That's such an interesting point, sort of this idea of how you visually present, right? So it's like, bring a folder, even if the folder has nothing more than your directions in it, or a pad of paper and a pencil, or, some things that sort of look like you've done something before you've walked into that interview room, communicates preparation unto itself. And I think it's important what you pointed out about, don't be afraid to do some research. It's a lot of people are afraid to sort of call people or ask questions. Those are all things that show us your interest. And so we want to encourage people to do that. So let's move through the interview process. Let's assume you've done all the preparation that our guests have suggested, and now it's interview day. And some of the obvious recommendations for interview day is to be well groomed, to arrive on time, have all the materials. Maybe they've given you a task or something that you had to prepare for. So the next thing I'd love for us to talk about, and I'm going to start again with you, Michelle, is what are some of the other things that a candidate should be thinking about on interview day to sort of make sure they show up as their best selves?
I think the first thing that you mentioned about arriving on time is important. Even being a couple of minutes early, think about the people that are greeting you when you walk into the interview space and how you're connecting and communicating with them. All of the parts of your interview are happening from the minute you step through the doors. Think about obviously what you're wearing, that you are presentable in a professional way. Not that you have to go out and buy a brand new suit if you don't have one, but that you are prepared for what the role is and showing that you're taking this seriously and that this is important to you. The suggestion that you shared about having a notebook or a folder, I often use for myself the strategy of looking at the job advertisement, going through the different pieces of the position and making notes for myself about each parts of those roles, so that when you walk into the interview space, if you get frozen because it is a intimidating type time, you have something to refer back to. It again just shows that well preparedness and that you are really giving and putting forth your best self.
That's great advice. Nicole, what would you add on to that in terms of things that candidates should think about on interview day to come as their best selves?
Yeah, I think Michelle had some really great points. I often give the advice of your interview starts from the moment that you accept the appointment time for your interview. So from the very beginning of your communication with any staff member that you're scheduling that interview, and then Michelle makes a great point, is oftentimes the individuals letting you into the building to escorting you to the room. All of those are important pieces of your interview. And then in terms of appearance is, I always say, you want to dress for the role, but you also want to always dress above the role, regardless of if you're interviewing for a entry-level position or the superintendent of schools. You want to make sure that you are looking your best self. So grooming habits, just making sure you're not looking disheveled, your hair looks nice. We're not saying go out and get a whole makeover before you come in for an interview, but you definitely want to be presentable. And you want to take the time to be well researched with the interview process. Also, in terms of the notes or documents that you bring with us, I often tell people to make sure that they have a list of maybe possible examples that they'll be able to share when answering the question. And that's a really great way to be prepared before you walk in the door.
I think the points that you both raised about first impressions is really important to underscore. One of the things, my father always said to me is have a really good handshake, right? And so sort of just things as simple as how you extend a hand or greet people in a way that's customary. I think, and also practice little bits of small talk. Right. So sometimes you're going to be escorted down to an interview room by somebody who might be who may be a future colleague or member of your team, and sort of saying, I'm so glad to meet you, or how long have you worked here, or, thank you for walking me down, so sort of making sure that you don't have too many awkward pauses, and just give that sort of impression that is positive and professional from the first person who greets you all the way down to the interview table is really important. So I know these are great things to share, and it's going to really help some of our listeners, particularly as they're making some of those decisions on interview day. So let's move through. Now we're in the interview and there's a dialogue, and this has happened to all of us, I'm sure. There's a question that's asked that's either confusing or stumps you. Maybe you blacked out, you got nervous, you lost your train of thought, or you truly don't understand. And a lot of people tend to stumble. They lose track, or they think they're answering the question, but they're actually not sure, and they're afraid to say it out loud. For me, I always have a formula in my head when I'm answering interview questions that I call define, describe, dream. So no matter what I'm asked, that's what I do. I define the term. So if I'm asked, let's say, a question about classroom management, if I'm a teacher candidate, I would say, when I think about classroom management, I think first about how to have a positive and inclusive environment. Then I would describe it. That would be part 2. Here are some of the ways in which I do that work. And then I dream. I project myself into the role. If I'm hired for the role that I'm interviewing for today, here's what you can expect to see in terms of classroom management. So this idea of having a formula that you can easily latch onto helps you to perform. One of my mentors said the best way to accelerate performance is to decrease anxiety. And having interview question formulas or response things that aren't routinized, you don't want to see mechanical or robotic, but it'll help you sort of make sure you hit on those key points, is essential. So the next question for both of our guests, and Nicole, I'm going to start with you, is when you think about strategies for candidates to use when they're either answering a difficult question or an unfamiliar question, what do you recommend?
So I always recommend, I really like your strategy. I think that's a great formula. But when individuals that they're not there yet, or they haven't come up with their own personal strategy, I always encourage, take a deep breath. The interviews are not a race. Oftentimes there's plenty of time set aside for the interview to happen. So take a deep breath. Don't be afraid to ask for clarification or to repeat the question. We encourage our hiring managers to have the set of questions in front of our candidates when they are holding the interviews. And it's okay to take a pause and reread that question, or ask them to repeat the question. When you are answering that question, if you don't have the experience or you don't know, there is no harm in saying, I don't know. But always follow it up with, I don't know, but here's my resource of what I would do to learn more about it or to problem solve it. Oftentimes, that's where a lot of candidates get hung up, is they realize that they don't know the answer to the question, or they're not sure that they have the experience that the interviewer is looking for. And the reality is you don't always know what they're looking for. What you think they are looking for in the best candidate may not always be what you think it is. So we always want honesty within the answers, and it's okay to take a pause and repeat.
Yeah, and I think sometimes I'm sure we've all had this experience where we are asked and then we answer a question and we're almost convinced we didn't really answer it correctly. And so I also think it's okay to say in an interview, I'm not sure I answered that correctly. And so if you'd give me a moment, I'd like to elaborate. Or if we have time at the end, if we can go back to that question, I'd like to sort of go and maybe refine what I shared a little bit more. I think it's okay to say, I may be confused here, and I'm okay to understand that. What about you, Michelle? What information might you recommend in terms of how people should approach getting stumped in an interview or being confused?
One of the things I like to do at the beginning of the interview is let people know I've sat in the interview chair many times. I know it's nerve-wracking. I know it can be anxiety producing, and trying to make them feel comfortable from the beginning if I can. During a question, when they may not know an answer, they may not respond immediately, much like Nicole said, giving a wait time, allowing them to look back at the question or even ask the question again. I also try to gauge as I'm watching them, if I can sense that they are stuck, that I could be the one to restate the question or to clarify for them. I also do remind them that there is time at the end, that we can always come back. But one of the best pieces of advice that I could give would be, much like Nicole said, it's okay to say, I haven't had that experience yet. That's not something that that's come into my previous work. If I was in the role, these are the things that I might do, but I'd also be wanting to learn from those around me and see what the expectations are. So you're answering the question, but you're also being candid and honest. And if you haven't had the experience, it's an opportunity for you to learn and grow.
I think that's a great example. And I know in our Quick Bites, that is a complement support for this podcast, we have some information about the STAR method. And the STAR method is another method that you could apply, which is very similar to what you've just said, Michelle, which is, when you're responding to a question, you go through the S, situation, T, task, A, action, and R, result. And so it sort of is a narrative tool. Remember, these interviews are stories that we're telling about our work. And so emphasizing your personal contributions, looking at how you would show up in certain circumstances, that's really the heart of the response. Sort of, here's how I would approach it, or here's how I've done this something similar in the past, is very important. I always tell candidates, we want you to do well at the interview. We are looking for candidates and we want you to shine. And so, showing up as your true self and talking about what you know is almost as important as telling us who you're going to be when you're learning new things, because we expect that you're going to come needing to learn. So sort of communicating your character in that spirit of, I don't know yet, but here's how I'd grow, is also very important. So now we have the case where you basically answered a question. You sort of, like we talked about before, maybe you missed it. And we talked about these idea of saying, hey, I'm not familiar with that, or I'd like to go back. And you all shared some great advice about ways to kind of come back to that. So the next part then of our interview we get to at the end is that sort of closing experience, as I say. And all interviewers run this a little bit differently. Some people might ask you if you have any questions. Some might ask you if you want to go back and answer anything more deeply. Others might say, now's your chance for a closing comment. And so I'm always interested about sort of how you can create that wow factor. Nicole, let's start with you. How can someone wow you during an interview? What are those things that sort of you go, okay, they came ready to go today? What impresses you?
I really enjoy getting those questions that they want to know more about either the team, the position, the organization as a whole. I actually just sat on interviews yesterday, and I had some really great questions from a candidate. Things like, what does success look like in the first 90 days in this role? Can you tell me more about the team and what the dynamic of the team is and who I'd be working for? Another question was, what does a typical day look like in this role? And I love that question, because 9 times out of 10 is there is no typical day in any particular role, because anything can happen. But those are questions that really tell me somebody is truly interested in not only the position, but interviewing us as well as a potential employer, because that's oftentimes the missed factor when people are interviewing. Yes, we are interviewing them, but they are also interviewing us as well. So that to me is something that really wows me, when somebody has some really good questions about, the position, organization, and department as a whole.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I was on a panel recently talking to rising juniors and seniors who are going to be graduating. And I said, when you think about the questions you ask, those say a lot too. So when I was a principal, I used to appreciate when candidates would say to me, what's a challenge that this team is facing in the coming year? And how do you hope I can contribute to making, solving whatever challenges you're facing, or things that really pose you as a contributor and someone who is really looking to add value to the organization, the office, or the school. Michelle, what about you? What's a wow factor that really leaves you with a positive impression of a candidate?
Nicole and I haven't even practiced, but I was thinking many of the same things. The questions that you could ask at the end are really so important. We know you want to know when we're going to be done interviewing and when you might hear from us. But beyond that, I had a candidate ask once about what collaboration looks like. What teamwork, how we would define teamwork, or what that looks like in the building. And I thought, while that is a question, it's also signaling something so important to them, that these two pieces of a larger picture of that job are important, that they want to know what it looks like and feels like here to see if it's for a match for them. So all of those types of questions that lead us to know you care about the position, you care about the specifics of the job role and responsibility, and you actually see yourself moving into it and wanting the opportunity to grow as a result of it. I think those things are so important. I also ask if candidates have anything they expected I was going to ask as they prepared for the interview, but I didn't. And that kind of opens the door for them to add on any other experiences, any other things maybe they forgot about in another question, or they just didn't have the chance to highlight, so that they really get that full rounded experience.
Those are great suggestions, and sort of it's like the part B of the interview, right? The questions we've asked them and then what they ask in return. I know one of the other things that I wanted to touch on was this notion of artifacts or work samples and things. I know once, maybe I'm dating myself a little bit, but I had a candidate give me a thumb drive as they were leaving. Probably could just email a link now, but at the time that was a big deal. And they gave me a thumb drive and they said, after the interview, I would love if you would take a peek at what's on this thumb drive. And when I looked at it, they'd put together a virtual, like a slide deck. It was, a PowerPoint slide deck with some examples of them teaching and their work. So I think also go above and beyond what they're asking for and bring a portfolio of sorts or some samples of your work, particularly if you're not sure you do a great in-person interview. It's a nice way of triangulating, how you show up and what you demonstrate about yourself. That's just not, it sort of levels out the weight of the verbal interview when you can bring work samples. So now we're at the end of the interview. Everybody's asked their questions and the interview is concluding, and sort of obviously they're going to have a closing remark, firm handshake. I love a good story about your why as a candidate. You're going to smile, but then people sort of aren't sure what to do with themselves after the interview. Should they email the hiring manager? Should they email you, Michelle, and say, it was great to meet you? Should they email Nicole and say, when am I going to find out? Should they send a note of thanks or appreciation? What's the right ritual? So for you all, what are the standards that you appreciate in a candidate following up after an interview is completed? I'd love to start with you, Nicole. What is your best advice in that way?
Yeah, I think a thank you follow-up is always appreciated. I think you have to be careful in the way that you write it, though. So what you want to do is reiterate or thank you for them taking the time to meet with you and learn more about you. Reiterate some of the highlights of your skills and why you're a good fit for the position. And you always want to leave it off with, I look forward to hearing the decision or the outcome of this. You want to be careful to be confident or not be overly confident, but not to be too humble either. So you want to make sure that you're leaving that good impression and addressing the individual as well with an email. I think emails are the most the quickest way to provide it. I have recently that I think handwritten notes are starting to come back a little bit, but both are okay.
That's great advice. Sort of making sure you follow up, reinforcing things about your candidacy and having an open posture about the outcome. Michelle, what would you add on to that?
I agree completely. That email afterwards, just thanking you for your time and your interest and, being available and interviewing is much appreciated. And it does show that kind of full circle dedication to the process. I often say to candidates as they're getting ready to leave, I know you're going to get in your car and you're going to drive away and you're going to think of that thing that you wish that you said. And that's happened to me. You can feel free to get in touch with me after the interview. So sometimes I might have a candidate include something like that. I've also have candidates, much like you said with the thumb drive, who have included an attachment or a link to a Google slide or a s'more newsletter that has different things outlined about their experience. And those are, again, just things that do go above and beyond and really bring it to that next level to close out that full process.
Those are great pieces of advice to sort of put a bow, if you will, on your interview. Well, we have a little bit of time left, so we're going to switch over to a listener question. And I think this is one a lot of people can identify with. This person shared that every time they interview, their cheeks get flushed and they get blotchy skin. And then they sort of shake from nerves and they just sort of come across as completely flustered. And now they're really reluctant to apply for jobs just because the interview makes them so anxious. What do you suggest for our last question to someone who finds that they struggle to sort of show up as their best selves in the interview because they get just so nervous? What do you think, Michelle?
I am one of the people that can get a little red-faced and a little blotchy, feeling put on the spot. So back to that question about, getting ready for the interview, I think about that. And I would encourage someone to think about, maybe you don't want to wear the V-neck blouse and maybe you want to wear something that's more of a crew neck or a boat neck. And that in itself might make you feel a little better because you're limiting if that would be visible to the interviewer. I also think that it's okay to say when you walk into the interview, I'm really nervous and I might not always interview well, but I really want to give my best self. Practicing, I think, is going to help you reduce that anxiety. Thinking about questions you could be asked and potential answers, I think, would help. That's part of the reason that I jot down notes ahead of time and kind of think through all aspects of the job description. The more prepared I feel, the less anxious I feel. And then that does let me go into the interview feeling more confident and comfortable.
That's great advice. Nicole, what has been your experience with this, either as yourself as a candidate or as you've advised others?
Yeah, I've had both situations happen where I've walked in very confident, and then there's been other times where I am very, very nervous. And I've actually sat on several interviews where I see this happen to the other candidate. The best advice I can give somebody who is worried and anxious about the interview process would be to prepare. So that is, come with your notes. I always say, go on interviews, even if you're not sure about the position, because the more practice you have being on that end of the table, the more prepared you'll end up being and more confident you'll be in the interview process. So practice and take notes, and it's okay to read off your notes. Eventually, you'll get more confidence in yourself when you are interviewing.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially about this idea of going for it, because exposure matters. I can think of more than one person where when I first met them and interviewed them, I didn't hire them for that job, but I thought of them for another one that they, in some cases, ended up getting. And so sort of those impressions, those attempts to put yourself out there, that exposure is also really important, not only for yourself to sort of get comfortable with interviews, but also because sometimes people will think of you for other things, even if they don't select you for what you've actually applied for. So in the last sort of moments that we have together, it's a time for our lightning round, which is as brief as you can. Sort of, if you could offer one piece of advice to someone aiming to level up in their chosen field or passion, what would it be? We'll start with you, Nicole, and then we'll go to Michelle.
Don't assume that the interviewers know everything about you and what you do. I see the biggest mistake happen is when candidates come in and they may know one or two people on the panel and they just say, well, they know me, they know what I can do. and they fail to provide specific examples and details about their true knowledge, skills, and abilities.
Thank you to both of our guests, Nicole St. Louis and Michelle Basie, for bringing their expertise to our time today. We hope that you've walked away with some great resources on how to be successful in your interviewing experience, whether you're just starting out or whether or not you are looking to take your career to the next level. These podcasts are designed to support your workforce and career advancement. Please check out previous episodes on resume writing and goal setting on our website. And come back here in January for another episode of Higher Education, the podcast dedicated to supporting our employees today and into the future. Thank you again, and take care.